double screen. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's workshop. We are very fortunate to have Dr. LaShan Epperson from the School of Business. Today's workshop is going to be focused on active learning in the classroom, and she will focus mostly on the non-STEM classroom. About a month ago, we did a session with Dr. McCoy, who focused on the STEM classroom. So if you missed that workshop, that's available on the website. We will be recording today's session, and we will also send the recording out to those who can't join us. The Faculty Development Council wants to thank you, Dr. Epperson, for taking the time and the effort and just sharing your expertise and your experience about what it's like to teach here at APU using active learning strategy. And we look forward to learning from you. And for those who are watching this either live or after the fact, if you have any questions about what the Faculty Development Council does or how we can support you as a faculty, please feel free to reach out. So Pina McCoy is the chair of that council, and I serve as the representative from the Office of Provost. My name is Mike Chong, and you can always reach out to us. But with that, I will hand this over to Dr.
Thank you. And I want to again say that although it would thank me for being a part of this experience, I also too want to thank the council for actually selecting me to be a part of this experience. I literally started with APU about 6 years ago. And when I started with APU about 6 years ago, I was already working for a technology company. More specifically, I was working for Apple, and I had nearly gotten to 10 years by the time I chose to depart ways with Apple. And at the time, I remember thinking, what's on the horizon? I mean, we're coming at that point to the tail end of our COVID at-home experiences. We were starting to kind of reemerge back into the store, the retail environment. And I just, again, was kind of like, what's life going to be like? And at the time, I thought that it would make sense for me to go a little bit deeper in higher education because I was already a part of it. I had been an adjunct professor for probably about 13 years prior to. So I've always lived and worked as well as taught simultaneously. So that had grown very comfortable to me to do that much. And I call it multitasking. But as I got closer to the reemergence post-COVID, back into, I call it corporate America style experience, I started to, of course, wonder what would life be like as we, again, move forward. And I remember at the time, AI was just simply a forethought. We knew we were doing something in laboratories at Apple, but it wasn't really heightened in the retail experience. And then I thought, you know what, I wanted to kind of get a little deeper in higher education because I knew what was coming because I was also working on a higher ed team with Apple. And at the time at which I got to a point where an opportunity was being presented for me to go a little bit deeper with Apple education, or perhaps to take a U-turn and go a little bit deeper in higher ed. Obviously, you know what the choice was because I'm here today. But it got to a point where I wanted to do more. So this opportunity creates, again, a segue for me to be able to do more with my peers, as well as to do more by way of the research that's being done, that I've done, that, of course, I know that Mike Tron has actually done a lot of research centered around AI. And why it is that I'm talking about AI at the starting point of this particular presentation is because I see it as a game changer. And it's a game changer in education because a lot of things that which we'll experience by way of what it is that I'll talk about today, what it is that we'll share today, but overarchingly, the things that we'll experience will be highly impacted by the artificial intelligence or the AI that's emerging into the way that which we do things. So with that being said, our focal point today is going to center around active learning strategies to enhance engagement in social sciences and humanities classes. So over the past, at this point, I'm going to go with 15 weeks. 15 weeks into this semester, I literally spent each week, each class experience, kind of testing out some theories that which, again, I've read about, and of course I had centered around providing educational experiences for the students. And I specifically call it an experience, moreover than just coming into a classroom space, sit, listen, and then we'll text. How is it that we create experiences so that the students have actually come into a space knowing that they're going to do something, whether it be engage in conversation, whether it be to go a little bit deeper in their thoughts. But when you come into a classroom experience with Epperson, I believe that the students know that something's going to happen today. And I always start with, what transformational thing are we going to engage in over the next hour, hour and 10 minutes that's going to make you better when you leave as compared to when you started? So when I think about, of course, those strategies for how to create levels of engagement inside of the classroom, I also think about ways to kind of meet, as I've said here, meeting the needs of today and the opportunities of tomorrow. So how is it that we meet the needs of our students today and of course be focused on the opportunities for tomorrow? Oftentimes I share with students, like the jobs that which you will have, it's very likely that they don't even exist today. So it's because we know this that it offers an opportunity for us to be able to kind of think in different directions and come up with perhaps what we'll call a solution to a problem that we, again, don't know where it is that we're going to end. So when we think about the evolving student body, we know that we're coming into a space where the students have a higher level of expectation for what it is they want from higher education. We know that because we're getting to this thing that we call, of course, the cliff in higher education. And that could be predicated based on the fact that we've not had enough live births over the course of our history. And we're getting to a point now where we don't have enough students to recruit from. And it can also be that our students are at the pinnacle of actually making decisions about go it to work or go it to school. And if I choose to go it to school, what's the value of me going to school today? In other words, we start to talk about the cost of education when we don't necessarily see the value of education. So perhaps that's a big deal. And again, evolving student body is telling us that something needs to look different. We know that students come into this space and they want what we will perhaps perceive to be immediate gratification. We've perhaps even have taglined this current generation as the microwave generation because they want it fast, they want it quick. But what does that mean for us when we think about the classroom? Again, I call it the experience. The next point is the changing landscape. And it starts, of course, as I do often, start with the end in mind, the changing landscape when it comes to AI, artificial intelligence. We now know, too, that much of what it is that we can ask a computer, artificial intelligence, the mindset of something that's being programmed, we can ask it for theoretically what it is that we want, and it gives us output. And it's because of that, that again, it creates a challenge when you think about the changing landscape. What is that change going to include? And how is it that we're going to be positioned to be able to, again, continuously attract students into our space, be able to maintain them in our space, and to create an output we call, of course, graduation, whether it be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, or perhaps even a tiny bit longer. In addition to that, new circumstances. Why is it that one will choose higher education if the premise is, of course, the jobs that which you may have, we don't even perhaps know that they exist today? When you come into the classroom space, what are we going to be teaching them so that they can be ready for what we consider perhaps to be the unknown? But it takes us to a point, and at this juncture, the future vision. So at this particular juncture, I want to, of course, kind of give you some insight in terms of how it is that I will use the classroom to engage students. So perhaps I'll be bouncing back and forth, but I want to kind of give you a feel for what it's like to sit in what I call this Epperson experience. So even with the course lecture, because we know that it's not going to be our wayward way to be able to say, hey, students, come in, sit down, listen, and then, of course, here's the test. Maybe that doesn't work the same for us anymore. But when a student is in a classroom and they have their technology, very far between will they bring a paper and a pencil and be able to engage that way. So we know that technology is mostly being used inside of our classroom by way of the students as well as by way of us. But not fully to negate, oftentimes in the classroom, I'm conscious about, of course, the resources that are being extracted. Oftentimes in the classroom, I'll engage with a sheet of paper. Because I also too, based on some research, I also too know that students like the tactile learning experience, to touch, to feel. So oftentimes I come equipped with a piece of paper that's gonna drive us through an experience. And many times over, I'm able to take attendance this way too. I actually write their names on the sheet of paper. And this sheet of paper, again, doesn't say much other than at this point, this slide is talking about the evolution, and then I have a box. And it's very intentionally designed, at least by my thinking, that I put a box in terms of I want to box in your thoughts. I share the concepts, the theory, the approach with the students, because I also too want them to have insight in terms of how it is they can value the experience that which they're having. So I'll ask you guys, when it comes to the point where we're talking about a future vision, the other thing that I'm often doing in a classroom, and this typically starts day one, where I don't know yet where the discomfort is I'm looking to hear the voices of as many students as possible. I ignore to a large extent the whole concept about being nervous. I ignore to a large extent the whole concept about growing anxiety when I think I have to speak. I know what it feels like, perhaps many of us do, but at the same time, I want students to know from day one, and I stimulate them by bringing something into the classroom for them to munch on, bringing something into the classroom for them to touch, and then also to bringing something into the classroom by way of hopefully a spirit of transparency as well as kindness. And I encourage all students to use their voice, and that becomes a mantra from day one inside of the classroom. And this experience, because you're making an investment of time and money, I'm going to encourage you to use your voice. And the other thing that which, again, I'm going to encourage you around doing is being able to deal with ambiguity. Knowing that when you enter this door, the goal for us collectively is for you to leave it in a better way than which we started. And how does that make sense many times over? It's just adding something to your knowledge base. And in the classroom, I call it your repertoire. So when I think about future vision, I ask you, the audience, what do you perceive the future vision of education to be? What do you perceive the future vision of education to be? And Nori, I know that you are with us. If you do not mind, let's actually start with you. What do you perceive the future vision of education to be?
I feel like the future of education will be letting students define that vision. I feel like a lot of what we've done in the past is tell students what the vision will be, and then they just kind of absorb it. But I feel like there's going to be more agency of our students to really tell us what they feel like they need to know.
Beautiful. Courtney, what are your thoughts in and around the future vision of education?
Yeah, it's gotta be a good mixture of what it is that they want and what it is that we know that they need.
Beautiful. In my class, but not least of course.
It has to be job and marketplace relevant more than anything else, because that's what everyone is in many ways looking to education as that ramp or as the portal to a job or to something relevant in the marketplace.
And perhaps it comes along with our discipline when we think about humanities, when we think about the disciplines most of us are in. We think about, of course, all the things that which you guys have actually shared with us. For us, perhaps it's a big deal for us too, and I use the terminology, meet the students where they are and take them where we believe it is that they need to be. So for us, it's about, of course, not fully knowing what's ahead, but we have a great foundation in terms of where it is that we are currently. And we know based on what it is that we've done to grow ourselves academically, that we can, of course, move our students in a direction where they can deal with this whole concept, this whole notion of what, again, I refer to as ambiguity. A lot of it will lift off of just knowing that you have the ability to be tolerable, to be in a position where you don't know something, to not feel uncomfortable, to be able to use your voice to ask for, and in addition to that, to use your voice to really speak into the fact that you don't know and be comfortable saying that. It comes with a level of transparency. And the other concept which I give when we think about how it is that we grow ourselves, and based on just, again, most recent experiences. Now, I've not done a lot of research, and I respectfully will defer to the medical practitioners. However, we know to a large extent, in a very collective way, that mental illness too is at the forefront of a lot of experiences that many have, conscious use of words, a lot of experiences that which many have. So as we think about the future vision of where education is, perhaps where education is going, and it logically makes sense for us to pay attention to what has happened, because those all together become benchmarks for where it is, of course, that we'll spend time. Spend time, of course, focusing in and just going just a little bit deeper. So we know that by way of engaged learning, that our ultimate goals are to enhance the learning outcomes of our students. So and that becomes perhaps one of 6 that are in the collective of what it is that we've just shared. Our ultimate goal is to enhance the learning outcomes of our students. Now, for me and for many of us perhaps, inside of a classroom experience, I spend time very consciously, and it comes with a lot of work. And when we even think about small class sizes compared to large class sizes, it comes with a lot of work. But my ultimate goal, as early as possible, is to learn the students' names. So every day that which the students come into a classroom experience, I, again, lead through the process of really owning who it is that they are. No matter the classroom, no matter the subject, all of my subjects typically align with being very people-centric. But knowing who it is that you are, and at the very start of that knowledge of who it is that you are, is to make the declaration centered around your name. From the start, it's first and last. And then after the start, you can simply use your first name. And if there's a couple of you that share the first name, of course, add the last letter of, or add the letter of your last name. But the goal is to grow your self-identity and to not stand behind yourself, but to put yourself in front of yourself, or at least put yourself in alignment with being at par with the rest of us. Because we know in the classroom that there's the vocal as compared to there's the silent. But the goal is to push everybody in front of themselves so they can stand in a mix of many and still feel good about who it is that they are. In addition to that is to increase the level of engagement. Now, I'm not sure about many of you, however, I know that in my classrooms, and no matter how much of a consciousness that I apply to making sure that the space is comfortable, I know that I can come into a classroom and I can ask, "Good morning, how are you guys doing today?" And I get nothing but the stares. And then I think, you know what? Good, not great, but I'll keep going. And that typically is what I say to them. I said, I guess I'll spend the rest of this time kind of sharing with myself, and I'm hoping that you guys will add on. So that starts to open the door for them. In other words, when we start, I generally will tell them, we're going to begin with the end in mind. I'm going to tell you where it is that we're going to end, but in order for us to get there, I'm going to require, and again, conscious with words, require that you participate in the process as well. So I need for you to stay ready. Stay ready, and what we of course mean by that is that right now I perceive you as being ready. Ready to me means that I'm so ready that I'm far ahead of you. I don't even really pay attention to the simple niceties of good morning and how are you, and then of course me giving a response. So you've declared that you're ready. You're ready for what's next. And I use the experience as many times as possible to kind of fold into how it is that they started the experience. And then that helps me to actually increase the engagement inside of the classroom, is using the subject matters to help build out the experience. And then there are times, and it's not often, that a person will come in late. And then again, I'm very reflective. I don't want anyone to ever feel uncomfortable knowing that if I'm late, I'm gonna be on center stage. But after a few weeks, you'll learn who it is that you, of course, are engaging with. And you'll know who it is that you can spend some time with simple banner as compared to not. But every time an opportunity presents itself, for the person that I perceive to be that person that can have a little bit of simple banner with, we'll start with something that's of joking nature. Like, we're so glad you made it to class today. You're actually the one that we were hoping would be here because you are the one that everyone else designated as being the speaker for the next level of presentation that we're doing. And of course, the shocking looks come forward. But at the end of the day, that person rises to the occasion because expectations are there. Critical thinking development. Now, it's not easy to know if critical thinking has been achieved. I mean, are there ways to measure it? I, of course, think that there are. But when I think about every classroom experience, I know that critical thinking is very subjective. In other words, I'm not necessarily working to be able to measure the critical thinking. Moreover, that I'm really focused on levels of engagement. Be comfortable, again, using phraseology centered around, I'm not sure, but let me take some time to work towards becoming sure. Many times over, and I wanna assume, and again, sometimes it's poor to assume, but again, I wanna assume that we all deal with the same population of students. We'll ask questions and someone will say, I don't know. And for us in a classroom experience, I don't know is never a response. And again, consciously using the word never. I don't know becomes a feeler statement that usually is given because a person feels a rush of anxiety when they feel like they're being called out or called on. So in situations like that, we practice, so that we can get good at saying, you know what, I'm not sure, give me a couple minutes, or give me a day, or give me whatever it is that I need by way of time, and I'll get back with you. And then hold a person accountable to that. So in other words, when I think about critical thinking and the development of, is no one conceptually is ever off the hook. It calls on, calls out to be a response to whatever a question stem is. When I think about promotion of collaboration and communication skills, I actually was at a networking event, and this is the very first networking event in over 6 years, it felt like. But I was there this past Thursday, and I remember engaging with a vice president of a technology company, and she had a lot to say. She was actually really fun to actually converse with. But one of the things that which she actually said when she centered it around communication skills and of course collaboration in the workplace was that I am hiring people today that don't even know how to use a phone. And I thought, and I understood, and I'm sure we all do understood exactly what she meant. Because we're used to using a phone as a means for communication, but most of the action is happening by way of our fingerprint on the landscape of a, generally speaking, a cell phone. But when it comes down to lifting a phone and having a conversation, it's far in between. According to this one business owner, or highly connected to the business owner was her husband, so highly connected, that she's having to kind of start at ground level. And then in addition to that, this was Thursday of last week, and then on Saturday of last week, I had the pleasure of meeting with the vice president, regional sales for Mattel, toy manufacturer. And we were engaging around, of course, what is it like to be a leader in the workspace that you're in, and some opportunities for internships. And she shared that, you know, I'm not able to bring the interns in and put them immediately to work with regards to project work. I'm having to, again, start at the bottom tier and just get them acclimated to being a part of the sales world and having, again, sit-alongs with my more veteran sales rep so they can at least hear the cadence in terms of how sales calls are handled. Again, two unrelated individuals have perhaps the same things to be said. So I think that we are at a point too where we can collectively and comfortably say that collaboration is a big deal. Now, I know in this particular experience, with us, that I'm doing most of the talking. And that's only, of course, for the next several minutes. When I'm in a classroom, I honestly believe, as well as what I've been taught to do, because I was a part of a corporate sales team for nearly 2 decades. If you're in a position where you're selling at this point, again, not to be dismissive, selling the concept of what it is that I'm teaching, if you're talking more than you are listening to what the subject matters have to say, then you're missing some part of what needs to really happen. So when we think about communication, communication just is not a one-way direction in terms of me speak, you listen. And then we expect a nonverbal style of communication to transpire. Communication is about seeking by way of listening to the voices, whether it be virtual or in our classroom experiences, listening to the voices of our students. And like I said before, I don't know is not an optional response. It has to be something, even if it means go ahead and bypass me, perhaps come back to me, but at the same time, there's an expectation that's been laid that everyone must participate. And then I think about preparation for real world challenges. Now, again, 2 unrelated professionals basically have the same talk tracks. So we know that there's some real world challenges. We can think about real world in terms of our domestic experiences. We can also think about real world in terms of our worldwide experiences. And I say, as well as perhaps all of us, lean into the notion that we're all a part of a worldwide experience. Every day that which we go to work, we wake up, and of course we come into the classroom environment. How do we know that to be true? Because we have access. www, World Wide Web creates an experience for us. And it's because we know that we're part of this World Wide Web kind of an experiential situation on a daily basis, we know that there's some challenges that are definitely aligned with that. How is it that we confront those challenges? So when we think about the strategy centered around experiential learning, or how it is that we can lift the learning experience inside of a classroom, case studies tend to be a good use of an opportunity to create, segue into knowing what's happening into the world around us, and at the same time being in a position where we can put some thought. In addition to that, we hear oftentimes about the DEI experience, but more specifically, inclusivity and diversity. When we think about this inside of our classrooms, we think about this in terms of how do we get 100% of our student body involved, and at the same time understand that we come from different perspectives, and to be respectful of the fact that we think different. We've been in a position where we've had to adapt differently. But what I find, again, to be true for the most part inside the classroom is most of our students, if not all of my student experiences, have centered around inclusivity and diversity being welcomed. And I know what it is that we hear centered around the DEI experience, but I find that it's very welcomed around, again, the student experience. So how is it that we lift from that? And I tend to use that quite a bit to lift from, but it takes us a little bit further. On a daily basis, that which I provide instruction, and again, I'm using conceptually the whole idea centered around I, so I-ism. But I want to speak from the frame of what it is that I do, and hopefully be able to impart, or even at some point to be extract from what it is that others do. But when I think about what it is that I do every day, on a mission to increase levels of communication. Now, I do also know that when I come into a classroom, the active learner says to me that I don't know what it is that I don't know. So there's a lot of dependence on perhaps us, me, you, to be in front of a body of students and be able to impart knowledge. I highly encourage, and I'm sure as well as most of us do, is to start the learning process outside of the classroom. Now, one way for us to actually check, to inspect, to see if that's happening, is that we trigger the classroom experience by way of asking questions that are highly related to the course textbook. And the other thing that which we know is if we don't create linkage, it starts to again become, you don't really have to get the course textbook because he or she doesn't even use it. Now, I never want us to be in a position where I've asked you to purchase the course textbook by way of the course syllabus, and then of course never draw any inference from it. So I think it behooves us to continuously connect to what it is that we, again, are encouraging our students to do, which is to come to class, to come prepared. By way of the course textbook, you have access to actually being exposed to a lot of what's going to be talked about in class. And not from the perspective of regurgitation. In other words, I say this, don't come to class expecting for me to read the course textbook to you, and neither shall you come to class expecting me to use the PowerPoint slides to, again, just share with you what it is that you have and get the degree of reading. Our goal is to bring all of that to life. And a lot of it is going to be by way of communication. We're in perhaps the same positioning right now. I can provide you with theoretical perspectives. I can provide you with some forethought in terms of the knowledge that I have based on some of the things that I've done. But let's not forget the premise that a lot of the jobs that which you will have, we don't even yet have titles for. So this opens the door for us to be in a position where we can actually go through the process of learning together. In addition to that, information literacy. It goes in conjunction with what I've just said, but you add perhaps a tiny bit more value to it. Information literacy. Now, despite the fact that we believe that the students have grown up with technology in their hands, perhaps their whole lives, there are certain things that I have dismissively thought that they should just absolutely know how to do. From the point where it is that I'll ask a question and they'll just kind of sit respectfully, very dumbfounded. And then I start thinking to a large degree, sometimes you just don't know what it is you don't know. And this is an opportunity for me to help to, again, provide some enlightenment. And, not so much a but, and I simply say to them, and as a reminder, don't forget, right before you is access to the world that goes beyond where we are right now. And to encourage the use of the technology. Not for just for what it is that you use it for, but it can be a helpmate to your learning and development as well. Analytical thinking, of course, is just embedded into some of the things that have just been spoken about. To be able to think, and I use the kind of concept of go beyond the surface and not just even to the second floor. I want to find you somewhere on the third floor, leaning into the fourth floor, perhaps going into the fifth floor. Perhaps I'm going in a descending way where we think ascending. But I want you to be someplace other than just simply being on ground level. I want you to be able to think deep. I want you to think deep about exposure, experiences, and about what could be. Now, while I know, well, we know that everybody's not going to end up in the same space and not everybody's going to be in a position where they're going to acquire knowledge equally or evenly. We call it, some parts of it is equitable. However, at the same time, I believe that we're all capable. So surface level thinking, not to be, again, I choose the notion often of being dismissive, but what's the purpose of the investment of time and money? Is to be able to go just layers deep. So analytical thinking. And then along the way, a part of the process is to push responsibility onto the students to be actively involved in their own learning. So when we think about, of course, where it is that we're going, you own the responsibility too. Now, we've been in situations where we've been paid to perhaps perform. And the students may or may not have been in those kinds of positions. But in positions where I've been paid to perform, hired because of a certain degree of pedigree, and getting on the inside of some of the most appreciable organizations. And I can tell you from the start to the middle to the end, the learning process never stopped. So as we, again, go through this whole process of sharing what it could be like, I want us to also be footed in knowing that what it is that you experience today, it just becomes, again, it's a catalyst for where it is that we're perhaps going tomorrow. And in addition to that, the global, cultural, social, environmental responsibilities. Now, I believe that many of the students can actually teach me a lot about those things combined. The social consciousness that which these kids have today is very different than the level of exposure that which I believe that I have. So I also find it in an active learning environment where you can be transparent and share with the students that you right now are teaching me some things. I've seen that highly infuse a group of students. I've seen that create levels of excitement because if they have a level of appreciation for what you're doing for them, and then they think they can pay it back or pay it forward by way of something they can do for you, I've seen them go over and beyond what I ever expected. And then to, of course, present to me what it is that I shall think in alignment with what it is that they think. And then, of course, specialized skills, application of knowledge. Now, over time, we hear quite a bit about how important perhaps it could be to lean into vocational learning. And I have an appreciation for that, perhaps we all do. Behind vocational learning, we also know that there is an absolute need for knowledge workers. So when we think about knowledge workers, again, it kind of, aligns with all the things that have just been shared. But equally important, knowledge learning is about, of course, just being able to kind of deal with the ambiguity of not knowing and seeking ways to kind of figure things out. But that requires a level of empowerment. So when I think about how it is that we get to active learning strategies that can help us, let's just actually start with, and again, this is not by way of Webster's dictionary, a definition for active learning strategies. However, it can be any type of active or activity during class that engages learners into a deeper thought about the subject matter. So anything that which we can be exposed to. Now, consciously, when I use the word anything, there are times where I need to qualify because students will say to me after a couple of weeks of being with me, Epperson, not anything goes. And I'm like, you got a point there. So when I wrote this, I thought about that. A student actually shared that with me and I thought it was a chuckling moment. But I thought for the purpose of where we are and knowing that we have such great freedom to be in a classroom, provide instructions for students, I'm going to suggest that we know our students best if we spend the time to get to know our students. So when we know our students best, because we spent the time to get to know them, anything can go with regards to how it is that we create levels of engagement. I'll share with you the things that I use most often. I'm huge on think, pair, and share. I'm huge on think. I'm huge on think. And once you've thought it through, whether it be 30 seconds, 1 minute, or 2 minutes, I time it because, of course, we're working with negative time when we get started. Of course, we're knowing it's going to come to an end. But to think about something, and there's typically a trigger from the start, share it with your neighbor, and then, of course, I'm sorry, I said it actually incorrectly. Pair with a neighbor, and then share it with your neighbor. And if time is permitted, I'll ask the neighbor to share the thoughts based on what a partner has said with the greater group. I really appreciate that, and that is what I actually earmarked as my first go-to, especially when starting a classroom experience. And then the other thing that which again becomes, I say, the mantra throughout a classroom experience is what I call the flipped classroom, which is where it is that the expectation is that you use the course textbook. Again, the emphasis on use the course textbook to actually heighten your knowledge. So whether it be that you, again, spend time doing an in-depth reading or you're scanning the chapter or the reading experience. But the goal, of course, is to familiarize yourself with what it is that you shall expect. And I say to them, as oftentimes they give it back to me, is to put yourself in a position where you are inspecting what it is that you expect. So that becomes a part of my think, pair, and share, is to lift something from the course textbook that they should have read, and this becomes the greatest telltale. Again, it's not designed to call anyone out. I want the space to remain a safe space, but it's also to heighten the seriousness, or perhaps what I call the most important parts of this learning experience is to kind of follow the instructions, because tried, true, and tested, these are the techniques that really work, is to expose before coming. In addition to that, peer teaching. Now, it's not uncommon if I choose to use PowerPoint presentations, which of course oftentimes are just lifted from the course textbook, is to actually, and again, it's not intended to be wasteful, but it's of course aligned with peer teaching, is to print each slide. And I pay attention to the number of slides because it's not that I print 60, but I pay attention to the number of students, I pay attention to the number of slides, and I print the slides. And then I ask the students as they come into class, and it's not a forewarned experience, here's the slide that when you see it, it's your go. In other words, you're going to share with us what that slide is about. You have access to your resources, and that could be technology resources, that could be partner resources, and that could be, of course, instructor resources. Ask what it is that you think you need to ask, so that when it's your turn, it's your go. And oftentimes I'm asked, how long is our presentation? I said, however long it is that it needs to be to get the point across. And just keep in mind, there's typically someone coming behind you, and class ends at this time. And that works, because no one ever wants to go for a long period of time. My last thing which of course I hang my hat on doing, is creating experiential learning experiences. Now, I know that most of us perhaps are not in this classroom experience today, but the thing which again, I thought that brought me the most welcomingest part of an experience going to work was how it is that I felt received that day. So inside of a classroom experience, it's not uncommon for me to bring something to chew on, candy to eat, or something like that. It's not either uncommon for them to come into a classroom experience and I host lunch for today, and it could just simply be a chicken sandwich. So I want them to know that if they don't come to this classroom experience, you're going to miss something. The other thing that I do by way of experiential learning is I open the door as wide as I possibly can to bringing in trusted advisors that I know can speak to the core of what it is that they do and how it is that they can impart some knowledge to. Those of us that are seeking to understand what it's like to be an accountant, those of us that are seeking to understand what it's like to be an HR representative, those of us that are seeking to understand what it's like to be a startup entrepreneur. So as many times as it makes sense, and the person aligns with, of course, the center focus of APU, I'll lend that out to again, trusted professional to come into an experience to impart that knowledge. So that becomes, again, those active learning examples, and there are many, many more. I also made mentions minutes ago about, of course, case studies. But whatever it is that takes us away from the platform of being in this kind of position where we're just creating an experience by way of us talking to, that's where, of course, the limitation comes for the type of experiences that which I like to focus on creating inside of the classrooms. Some of the key components of active learning is, of course, engagement, reflection, application, and collaboration. How is it that all of this happens in every classroom experience? And I don't spend time designing lesson plans at the start of the semester with a plan to kind of wiggle them through the rest of the 16 weeks or 8 weeks. Every week I spend time making sure that that lesson plan is curated, not just for me and my delivery, but who I know the students to be collectively. And that way I'm able to create levels of engagement because I know what Emma likes, I know what Sam likes. Again, I know the students and I know what makes sense for them. And I can have 2 classes of same title, but 2 different sections. And each one of the sections could ask for, by way of how it is they call the attention up, ask for something very distinctively different to be delivered. And I make those adjustments largely. Engagement is a big deal because, again, we talk about what it costs when we don't perceive value. And value for us largely comes by way of levels of engagement today. In addition to that, it's being reflected. Another thing that which I do by way of the single, typically half sheet of paper, it could even be a quarter sheet of paper, just depends on how, of course, I want to be conservative with use of resources. But oftentimes I'm asking the students before we end that day, and it may not be all. It could be just a sprinkle of a few. But tell me one thing, tell me 2 things. Again, it varies. But tell me how it is that you're going to pay forward the knowledge that which you gained over the past hour, 50 minutes, whatever the situation is. And that requires that you, again, and they know, You gotta stay ready. That way you don't have to get ready in the last few minutes of class. And then, of course, to be able to apply it. Now, again, based on the fact that I know that we have freedom, I'm, again, really big on being applied or demonstrating through application, the action of doing inside of classroom space, if it is on ground, and if it's an online, same kind of methodology. You gotta do something. When you show up to class, much of it will happen during the classroom experience. Outside of class, I want you to go further in your readings, go further in your exploration. And if you have some questions, bring those back with you next time, or send me an email, reach out and let's connect. But I want application to happen, so I encourage it. Again, I leave with the premise that if you don't show up to an Epperson class, you gotta kind of go it alone. And it takes a lot more time, takes a lot more energy, rather than having the collective. And then, of course, the collaboration creates a part of that collective. As we come close to an end, the key consideration is, again, we've said it, Courtney actually made reference to it earlier as well, is to really be able to focus on the student objectives. And I literally say often, I am the conduit of living the will of something much greater than myself. I would love to design a lesson plan. Of course, I've created the syllabi along with expectation. I would love for it always to be about something that I think makes sense for me. But I realize how, again, I use the concept of dismissive that is. I spend a considerable amount of time, again, from the start, getting to know each student. And then we know that once we learn different prototypes of people, we can start to kind of create segments of this group compared to this group compared to this group. It makes sense to understand the students so that you can meet their objectives. We know where it is that perhaps they need to be. They don't necessarily know where it is that they need to go. But together there's a nexus. What is it that you're seeking to get from this class? Very first class, I usually give them a index card and I ask them to write in too. What are you seeking to get based on what it is that you think you know? I hold on to those cards, and at the very last class, I give back those cards, and on the back of that card, I give them a well-wish note coming from me, signed by me. And that has, again, grown connections with students beyond the semester that which we've had the experience. And I do that 100% of the time, all the way through with regards to the students. There's been a semester most recent where I did it electronically, didn't have the same kind of disaster effect. So perhaps I'll go backwards. Student needs, student characteristics, available resources, those are all things that, of course, are part of those key considerations. In addition to that, we need to obviously anticipate with many things. As I know it in business, there's strengths, there's weaknesses, there's opportunities, and there's threats. Some of the challenges of active learning is, of course, student hesitancy. And again, I think in terms of all. And oftentimes you can't use those all-inclusive words, but yet I do. Every person that comes, I know there's a value attached to them sitting in that seat. So whether it be on a one-off or whether it be just give them time, but everybody inside of my classrooms have to participate. And so this hesitancy, again, while I know it exists, my goal is to continuously work, because it sometimes takes just a little bit longer for some to get to a point where the hesitancy becomes less, almost to a point where it's non-existent. In addition to that, lack of collaboration. Now, I know, as well as perhaps all of us know, that there's some of us that are inside of a classroom that don't like the engagement with others. So how is it that we create levels of collaboration? Is that early on, highly encouraged. In fact, you do the group assembly midway through, allow them to do the group assembly. By the time we get to an end, I encourage, if you would like to work alone, go it alone. But you have a full experience by the time we get to the end, where you have to know that that's your preference. And it's not about, again, swaying you, again, opposite of where it is that you would like to be in terms of your comfort. And then, of course, not always enough time to make so many things happen in the course of any given day, or perhaps even in the semester. So when I think about, of course, the active learning strategies, for me, it's just about communication and engagement. My mantras are very consistent. My mantras center around be comfortable with ambiguity, use your voice, and then of course, along the way, seek to understand. And the height of it all is to, of course, go for the feedback. Whether you give it or whether you receive it, be open to it because it's a part of the process for professional growth, our academic growth, and of course, our personal growth. So with that, I say thank you for your participation.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Epperson, for that very insightful and engaging presentation about active learning. So at this point, we will open up for questions. So I don't know if there's any questions from the online audience, but let me, maybe I'll start with the first question and I'll let the online audience get ready. Can you maybe help some new faculty, say, first 5 years of teaching, like, when they think about active learning, that's maybe something that they haven't experienced before in their own career as a student. And here they are having to do it as a teacher. So how would you describe that transition for someone who's a rookie?
Sure.
And trying to figure out what does it look like, especially if they haven't experienced it in their own career as a student?
So without the exposure, the experience, it could be this daunting thing is how do I kind of stand in the classroom, stand on the stage, and of course, what I call share the mic. I'm going to start with just realize, and again, I will continuously use the concept of not intending to be dismissive. Just know it's something that needs to be. If we've done our copious note-taking with regards to what students are wanting from, again, higher education today, a part of that is wanting to be involved in ways they don't know how to have that want. So what does that really mean for those of us that are coming into higher education and being, of course, kind of sensationalized by it being different? Is just know that we have a starting point, and that starting point is wherever it is that you are. And then how it is that you share that mic is just simply asking questions of your audience and not leaving anyone out. Amazingly enough, despite how nervous we can be and how much anxiety that grows when we're starting with one, we got to get to 25 of us. No one wants to be left out because that becomes more personable than anything else. But use our voices, use your voice to say, hey, look, be of a forethought. Let me share with you what's getting ready to happen. And then that means that we have to be, of course, knowledge planners ourselves. We have to know where it is that we're getting ready to kind of take our classroom experiences. When we first walk in day one, our goal is to meet the students, to hear the students say his or her first and last name, but to tell them why it's important that they do that. Not only have I shared with you that my name is LaShan Epperson, I'm also sharing with you that I'm standing in front of you and I'm going to provide instruction for 16 weeks or 8 weeks or however many weeks that we planned to be together. But I also know that with what it is that I do, much will not be accomplished without knowing how it is that you can be a contributor. So at this time, we're going to, of course, pass the mic, literally or figuratively, however it is that's being done. But it typically starts with an icebreaker. What's your name? What's your favorite cereal? What's your name? What's your favorite color? And it can be almost anything because the goal is not to really discover that moreover than it is to get the students to start speaking. And then make it an intentional activity to whether you start the class that way or you end the class. Tell me one thing that which you're taking with you as you leave. Tell me two things that which you're taking with you as you leave. And again, at some point, it's not about everybody participating in the same experience, but knowing because I do this every time we engage, that every time we're engaged, everybody will ultimately get a chance to engage.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think the two key words I got from your response is intentionality, and then engagement.
Absolutely.
So
long response to ultimately 2 words to describe: with intention and increased engagement.
all right, anyone online?
I have a quick question, and I have to get to a meeting. So, but thank you so much, LaShan. This was an amazing presentation. So much for you. I had a question about maybe a more, you were talking about feedback, and maybe a recent example where maybe on an idea evaluation or even they said to you, what kind of feedback did you receive that maybe changed the way that you did an activity or changed the way you thought about your course? Is it a recent example of that for you?
Sure. I seek feedback majority of the time. So the most recent feedback that which I was given, and it was for an exercise inside of the classroom that centered around each student having an opportunity to kind of share what it is they discovered as a result of an activity in the classroom. The feedback that which I've gotten from the students, and this seems to be, again, it's reoccurring and it's not about me, is that we appreciate coming to your class because you offer an opportunity for us to communicate, to share, to be engaged with our peers. We're not coming here and it's boring and we just sit here. This is exactly what was said. It's not boring, and I use quotes, air quotes around that. It's not a boring experience. We don't necessarily know what it is that we're going to have to do, but yet we come with anticipation. That's positive, very specific feedback. Now, on the flip side of that, when reading the responses to the course surveys, I've also gotten, and I looked at it as being somewhat of a opportunity for my self-growth, or perhaps even negative specific, is that Epperson requires us to speak so much inside of the classroom. And at one point, when is she going to take control?
Yeah.
And I just read it, and again, I take those things to heart because it's like, where's the balance? Where's the balance? And then after I thought about it, and it lasts for several days, it doesn't just go away within seconds. I thought about it, and I'm like, you know what? You just missed it. You missed it maybe for one that spoke up, but perhaps a couple more behind. But at the end of the day, the classroom, the platform, the experience that which you're creating is where a person can use their voice along the way and not necessarily hide behind, because who is it that felt that way? I don't know. Is it important enough to really focus on it in the future? Absolutely. But I am not yet at a point where I've made any adjustments because it's part of the expectation that which I have, and I know it works well.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, we are completely out of time. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope it was helpful for you. We have recorded this, and we will be sending this out to you, and then you're welcome to share this with your colleagues. So thank you again, Dr. Epperson, for your time, your expertise, and just for sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you.
All right, Sierra.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.